Hello, this is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to go over some map type related content, which will cover importing and using maps with the Fantasy Grounds Unity platform. I have a session loaded here. This is DnD5e, but it can be pretty much any platform. Most of this information, at least in the beginning, is going to be related to mostly just the map tools and images and assets. So if you want to theme some sort of map set, or maybe you want to kind of theme your experience around a certain thing, you could do that depending on the setting and the campaign that you're using. So technically I would just take and put whatever you can in regards to maps, but at the same time, you have to keep in consideration the quality of the maps, the size, and those sort of things. So typically when you are sourcing out maps, you want to know the dimensions in squares. So is it 20 by 10, 20 by 20, 30 by 30? 30 by 30 is probably about the maximum. You might see 32 or 38, but generally you want to keep those maps, the size of them down, and not just for memory's sake, but also for the actual comfort of using them in Fantasy Grounds, so you're not constantly fighting the interface and having lag and creating problems for people that are joined at your table, those sort of things, because that'll just stack up and just add to the problems that you might run into when it comes to using Fantasy Grounds for your virtual tabletop. So basically, I went ahead and I sourced some maps because I want a jungle theme. So what I have here are some folders that are themed for jungle, and then I have another folder that's also jungle, but it's a different author. So I'm using Heroic Maps, the Geomorph Jungle set, and then I'm using Mishka's Regional Jungle Maps. And the reason I did this is so you can kind of get an idea where the resources are. I put the links in the chat or in the description of the video at the end if you want to check these out yourself. I'm not advocating or selling for them, but I do want to mention that they are the artists of that and give them a little bit of attribution. So these were on the DM's Guild or Drive-Thru RPG, I believe is where I got these. So what we have are an array of folders. Now these are in my downloads folder on my computer, and I went ahead and extracted them, and I put them all in a folder called Jungle Theme Maps, which is important to do because a lot of times you'll just get random maps and throw them into Fantasy Grounds and you'll have no idea what they are until you open them. So that's important to have them labeled. And then the other thing is to group them up in smaller folders. So this is a regional map. Here's some various maps like a bridge and a pedestal map. They're kind of smaller. And then these are like river crossing, and then there's one that's just jungle. And then there's some locations. So there's a little bit of variety in here. And that's why I purchased the actual bundle at one point. I didn't know I'd already purchased it years ago, but I had it already. So I just re-downloaded it. And then I got this new regional map today, which kind of covers an overview of the region. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a way to help with this sort of thing. That way, if you go to do this yourself, you'll have an idea of the process. So right now, these exist on my hard drive. They are not in Fantasy Grounds. I just have this little preview window open. Matter of fact, I'm going to put my pointer on so it's easier for you to see where I'm clicking and that sort of thing. And I'm actually sharing my entire desktop at this point because I want to be able to demonstrate some of the things I'm pointing at and capture all the different layers. So this is my hard drive up here, and I have the actual files organized in folders. And then when you're in Fantasy Grounds, you can actually have this set up like this, and you can take and go to your library if you want, and then you go to Assets, which is where you're going to put all of your tokens or your portraits or your images. So images are anything like furniture and that sort of thing, all the way up to battle maps, regional maps, handouts, pictures of your monsters, those sort of things. Portraits are just for your pictures on your character sheet. And then, of course, tokens are for NPC assets and for players. Most cases, players cannot interact with images or portraits too much. They can change their portrait, but they can't edit or anything, and you can't edit images in Fantasy Grounds. So if you want a certain size or dimension, you're going to have to actually do that outside of Fantasy Grounds. The other thing is tokens can be interacted with depending on how they're set up. If they're attached to a character sheet, obviously it can be interacted with, but if it's just a token by itself kind of floating around on a map, you have to make it visible, and then your players will be able to interact with that token, but it won't be attached to the combat tracker. So those are some things to consider about assets. But in this case, we're going to talk about images. And right now I already have a campaign folder, but that will not exist until you actually add data to it. So I'm going to click down here at the bottom of the assets under folder, and that's going to bring up the actual folder of this particular session. So this is exclusive to this particular campaign or session. And you can see I have a Radiant Citadel picture in there. I'll just leave that there. But I'm going to pull up the directory that I had made earlier. So this is my jungle theme maps. So if I want to go back here, there is the actual folder. So I'm either going to cut and paste or copy it. I think I'll just cut it in this case so I don't have duplicates. So if I cut this and then I go over to the actual folder in Fantasy Grounds that pops up from this folder button, I'm going to hit Control V, which is for paste. And that's going to bring those over into this correct thing, or into this actual state for this folder. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to take and go to the campaign folder. And as you can see, there's nothing in there other than that picture. And the reason for that is because we haven't refreshed this yet. So I'm going to hit the refresh folder assets. And what that'll do is it will go through, rescan your computer, and it's looking to find the actual jungle theme bag here, which is the folder that I created. So whenever you create a folder, it creates this little bag. And then inside that bag are the subfolders of all the different maps and stuff that I had showed earlier in the folder system. So this is basically how you import images or tokens or anything like that. Just make sure they're in the correct folders, and that you hit this refresh button every time you add something new, because Fantasy Grounds won't show it or display it until it rescans your folders. So that's the first step, is to actually import the images. Before you even import them, it's a good idea to have an idea of what the dimensions are. You might want to retitle them. You might want to reorganize them. That way, you're not having as much trouble identifying them once they're in Fantasy Grounds. So that is a step that you might want to do before. So the next step is to actually go through. Once it's refreshed, we can go through and we can see whatever maps are associated inside of these folders. So it's going through and it's scanning. So here's a folder that has some pictures in here, and you click on them. You can bring up a preview image to kind of give you an idea of what it actually looks like. And this is something that you may or may not want to do, but you can set this image as your background decal. So if you wanted a really fancy looking image in the background, you could do that. Or you can add this image as a record to your campaign, because right now it's just in the asset folder. It's not really part of the campaign yet. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to bookmark these notes here just in case. And then I'm going to go over to the campaign folder on the right, or this section, and then I'm going to bring up the images and maps area here. So I do have other content loaded, some other woods type content. And if you have a lot of modules loaded, you'll have a ton of things in here. So if you add the maps right now as is, you can actually drag and drop them in here, or you can use the import files, or you can click on create from campaign assets, which will pull in everything at once. I don't recommend doing that until you're actually organized, and then do that at the very end. The import files is just kind of a way to import files that are randomly exist on your computer. And then this drag and drop method is just the internal way of adding them to your campaign. But the first thing I want to do is make a group. So there's a group up here called all, which is everything you have loaded. I mean, I have tons of things loaded. I want just an exclusive group for my jungle map. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this green add category button. And it will default to a title called group 1 or group 2, depending on how many you make. So I'm going to click on the edit groups, which will allow me to click on this actual line here. And I'm just going to call it jungle maps, just so I have an idea of what the content is. So I'll go to jungle maps, and that will do that. This will be a way to kind of filter and divide what I have. So this is my own data folder. It's separated from all the other modules and content. So now I'm going to stop editing by clicking on the edit button again. And then I'm going to select the actual jungle maps. And here, there's nothing here yet. So what I'm going to do is go back to the main folder. And if I was going to do this for my campaign, I can click on create from campaign assets. That's assuming that everything's all ready to go. Or I can individually import, or I can go to each one of these folders and drag and drop them over here into the image data area. I'm going to click on create from campaign assets just to show you how clean and quick that is. It says, are you sure you want to import all image assets as image records? I'm going to say yes. So as it's pulling that data over, it will report to you if you have duplicates. Because if you do this as you go, it will try to pull over the same content and put it into your image record area. And it'll give you an error. It says you already have this or whatever. So this is a kind of a clean way to do it. And it did everything at once, including that Radiant Citadel image, which I didn't really want in there, but it's not a big deal. So these are all the maps that are contained within all the subfolders of the campaign directory for this session. So these are only accessible from this particular campaign. If you want these to be accessible regardless of which campaign or rule set, you want to go back to the upper folder and you go to data, and that takes you to the higher level directory for Fantasy Grounds. And then you're going to just simply add them from this area and put them in this folder. That way, when you hit refresh and stuff, you can access those in whatever rule set you're in. So if it's buried into a campaign folder and you're in a whole different session, you can't get to the maps very easily. So that's just how you can structure it to where it's only unique to the campaign, or you can structure it to where it's actually going to be available for all of your campaign. So it just depends. In this case, these are in the campaign folder. These jungle themed maps are only accessible in this campaign. And that's because of where I put them. So now that you have all these in here, you can pick any number of these and just kind of look through them and decide which maps you want to use for your scenarios or for your encounters. So I'm going to go through and first find the Jungle Valley. So here's a Jungle Valley image that might represent the region that you're going to be in. So if you want this to basically or essentially be like your starting location or kind of your overview map, this is kind of something you'd want to have in your arsenal. So there's a valley here surrounded by mountains. There's some rivers. Looks like a depression here. So it looks like it's kind of ready to go for whatever you want to put in there. So I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to relabel this. It says Jungle Valley, and then it says 22 by 32 jungle. I'll leave that there, but I'm going to lead it with the word map. And then I'm going to put a comma after there. And this will tell me that these are, the maps that I'm using. And then over here, this is the player side of things. So what I might do is unidentify the image in case it says boss lair or something like that. And I'll just put regional jungle map. And that way I can share this with the players and they won't know the actual file name, or if it says boss lair or Dragon's Valley or something like that, it'll just say regional jungle map. That way, when I share this with them, they'll only see this title over here on the right. I don't know how many times I've shared an image and it says boss lair, and they're like, oh, is this the lair of the goblin boss? And I'm like, oh no, it's not, you know, or it is actually the lair. So once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and lock this, and you just have an image that you can right click on this top left corner and share this with your group, and you just hit share record, and it will send that picture over to your players. Now the problem can stem from this if the map is too big or enormous, or it's huge or high quality. That can sometimes cause problems. It really doesn't have much to do with their computer per se, a little bit, but it's more to do with the amount of information that can be passed back and forth between computers. So if you got a crappy upload speed or you have really bad bandwidth, that would be something that you might want to take care of when you are going to import the map before. That way, you don't have a problem with it. The next thing is that we want to go ahead and set up any sort of, if you want to do line of sight or anything like that, you can go ahead and add that sort of thing at this point. For this type of map, I might put a grid on it. And knowing that this map is about 140 pixels per inch, then I can set that in the scale. And that's one nice thing about buying your own maps online, is that you'll get the scale and it'll be easier for you to put that on your map with the grids. And it doesn't already have a grid baked into it. So it doesn't have a hex grid or anything on there, so I can lay down my own. And that's another important thing to consider when you're getting maps, is try to find ones that have the non-gridded version baked in, because that's kind of really meddling and troublesome when you're trying to line up the images with the actual map itself and the grid. So I'm going to unlock the map, go over to the grid, and I might set this as a hex. So you can change the grid type if you want. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to hex grid. And then change the visibility. And right now it's set to 50 by 50, which is a little bit small. So I'm going to go ahead and go to 140 as it's suggested. And that might be that might be a mile or 2 miles or 5 miles, whatever you want to set. Okay. And then this will be the way the grid looks like by default. So I want to go ahead and change the color of this. So if I go to color picker and change this to like yellow, it'll stand out a little bit more. It's at maximum opacity, or in this case opaqueness. So I'm going to turn down the opacity a little bit so that it's not too overwhelming. And put it probably about the middle and hit OK. So that looks a little bit better. And then the other thing is we want to go ahead and maybe define some locations if you want. There are map packs if you buy the Fantasy Grounds subscription for the map tools for the map packs, or if you bring in your own, you can bring in little symbols and you can add those to the map if you need to. But for right now, the main thing is putting the grid on there and getting an idea of what the scale is. So I might say that 1 square on here is 5 miles or something like that. And then you can change the dimensions if you have to make it smaller or larger. And then you have this color picker, so you can change the color if you need to. And that will be that. So if you like, basically your regional map set, and then once you have it all set up, you can right click on it, go to sharing, share record, and this will be something you probably keep your entire campaign. That way, when you're using the map, the players can find it. And what I recommend doing is taking this little link on the top left corner, drag and drop it to the hotkeys below. That way you can find it, and it's not going to escape you when you need to bring it up. You go ahead and lock the map once you're done editing it, and then put it in a place where you want it to be. So if you want this map to always be in this location, adjust the frame as you need, and then put it in the location that you want. And that way, once it's in the home that you'd like it to stay, it'll stay in this general vicinity if you don't move anything. So if I click and close this map, the next time I bring it up, it's going to be in the same spot. And that's something you'll have to learn with Fantasy Grounds, is whenever you open a new window, it always opens in the middle of in the center of the actual tabletop. Once you understand that, whenever you open something new for the first time, it's always going to be in the middle. So you want to go ahead and open it when it is in a location that you know where it's going to pop up. So you want to go ahead and put those maps in areas that you want to have this pop up so that you're able to do so without having any problems with it covering other material. And that's one of the things that people fight the most, I think, is when they first open this stuff up, it becomes a problem when they first open up a map or an image or a data type, and then they get frustrated because the window is in the way or it buries another window. So just remember, whenever you open a new map, it's always going to be in the center. Go ahead and do what you need to do with it. Size the frame of it, and then place it where you want it to open the next time you use Fantasy Grounds. In this case, for this session, it will not save over to another session because it is basically going to be a separate campaign with separate settings and images, so that this way you know that it's not going to get covered, but you won't be able to have the exact same locations in every single campaign because you have to do that manually at first. There's no way to transfer over all of your Windows locations to another campaign unless you go into the back end and copy the module state XML and that sort of thing. That's a little bit more advanced. So now that I have this map here all ready to go, I'm just going to go ahead and close it for now. But I know if I open it again from my shortcuts, it's going to go where I want to leave it. And that's right here. I don't want it to go anywhere else. I don't want it in the center. And if you need the space behind this map, go ahead and close it. Don't move it. That's where the problem lies. So if I open this map up in the middle of a game and I decide, well, I need to look over here, instead of moving it over there, I'm going to close it. Because if I close it now and then I open it again, it's going to open where I don't want it to be. So leave your images and your story entries and everything else in the place you want them to be, and then dismiss them or close them. Don't move them. That's the key. It really helps a lot when it comes to managing the windows. So now that I have that, I'm going to go into the other maps that I have put into this campaign. So if I go into the actual modules area, or in this case, the assets area, I can look at stuff in there. But I've already added it to the actual campaign. So I just have to go to the image folder. It's already filtered to the jungle maps. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this bridge location. So there's 5 of them with no grid. And they all have different variations. So that's a jungle location. That's a cenote. Here's a jungle river that's brown. And then there is a jungle river that kind of has more of a bluish tint to it. So let's take a look at that. So here's a jungle river, like a situational map. Maybe it's a crossing somewhere in your game. So I'm going to use this as one of my encounters. So the players might have to go across one of those rivers on the regional map, and then this will be the map that I use to essentially accomplish the encounter that I want to encounter. So this would be when I start deciding, okay, so this is the map, so I'm going to go ahead and rename it. I'm going to put map, comma, and then just leave this title. And then over here on the right, I might just put bridge or river bridge, something like that. And that way, when I share this with the players, they don't see all this stuff. They're just going to see river bridge. So I want to go ahead and click on unidentify so they don't see the actual title of the file. They just see this river bridge. I put bride, bridge. And then maybe jungle river bridge, something like that. So that way they have just a rough idea of what you're showing them here. And then go ahead and lock it. So that's, pretty simple. And as you notice, I immediately put this over in the top right corner, size the frame to where you want it. And you can even scrunch this up a little if you don't want too much of that frame on the outside. So if you have this zoomed in and out, what you'll do is once you lock this, you click anywhere on the image as long as it's not a token or a player, and you use the middle mouse wheel. Now, if you have a mouse that is a Mac mouse and you only have 2 mouse buttons, you'll have to use this golden, basically I call it the joystick, but it's a golden compass thing that you can move the map around with. And I think you can use the arrow keys for a Mac to move the map. So that's how you get around that if you're using a Mac. It doesn't have full the same shortcuts or the same type of data, so it's kind of hard to interact with the maps with the Mac. So we're going to hit this view. If I right click on the map, you can zoom to fit, zoom to fill. So zoom to fit will fit it in this area. Zoom to fill will actually go beyond the border and just fill it with the entire screen. So if I do that, it's going to do something like that. And then you can click on the map and roll the mouse wheel forward and back to zoom. That's some of the more important functions that you'll learn with Fantasy Grounds is the right-click menu and the ability to click on an asset and roll the mouse wheel in or out. If it's on a token, it might rotate the token or change the size of it, so you got to make sure you're clicked on a map and not an actual asset. So these are things that you might struggle with in the beginning. Just get used to first sizing up the frame of the map, which I've done already. And then I name it accordingly if it's applicable, if you need to. And then I'm going to unlock it, and you would start working on your line of sight. This really doesn't need a lot of line of sight. I mean, it's probably daytime in the middle of this jungle. You might want to put a few things on here. I'll go ahead and do that since I'm not in a big hurry. I'm not just, worried about one thing. So what I would do in this case is probably put the effect on the river for water. I might put a little bit of terrain tools on the trees here, so if you can't see through them. And then I might put a window type asset or tool on this bridge so that they can still see through it, but they can't walk off the bridge unless they want to. So that's another thing you can do. And then, of course, I'll just leave most of the map pretty basic. So this is a really simple map to put any sort of lighting and line of sight on. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and stretch this out so that I can see what I'm doing a lot more. And I'd usually do this when I'm editing maps so that I have more real estate to look at. The other thing is I don't turn on the line of sight and these play features yet until I get the work done. That way I don't get confused. I will use it to preview things, but I don't leave it on the whole time. So now what I'm going to do is do some of the terrain first. So that's just going to be some of these trees. And you don't need to trace around the very edge of every tree because it's not going to, it doesn't look right and it's not very natural. A lot of people I've seen put a circle around there and it looks like a big column or a big redwood tree when it's really not. So what I'm going to do is go over to the line of sight tool. And in this case, I'm going to pick the terrain tool because that's what I'm going to work with first. And I'm just going to be in the line tool, and I just want to click around the centers of these palm-looking trees. I don't know what type of trees they are, but they're kind of like palm trees. So all I'm doing is just kind of going through and systematically just clicking on these on the very centers. So I'm not really trying to go all the way to the outside of the tree. As you can see under the tree, and the only thing you probably can't see is the thicker parts or the trunk of the tree. Everything else is probably going to be visible depending on how you interpret it. It might not be visible. It just depends on what you want to do. So like here's a copse of thick bushes, so I might actually grab both of those. So it's just up to you how much detail that you want to put into your map. So maybe this one, you don't need a whole ton of these tree things for this particular map. So that's just basically the only occluders I have on here are to block. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to creatively use the basically the window tool, even though this isn't a window. And I'm just going to be in the line tool, and I'm just going to go through and just systematically put this on here for this bridge because it limits where the players can walk. They can't walk through the bridge, but they can still see. And that's all I'm trying to do is achieve that. I don't care if it's a window or not. I'm just trying to occlude it without creating shadow, and I just don't want it to allow for them to fall off the bridge very easily. So I'm just going to corral them on the bridge. And if they want to go through the bridge or climb through it, I can toggle this so that they can go through. It's just like opening the window, essentially. So that's one thing I'm going to do there. And it's kind of a creative way to prevent people from moving off the edge, but allowing them to see through without creating shadows. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually add water. So I want to do that. So I'm going to go to the effects tool on the top here. And on the very bottom, there's an effects layer tool that I can add a layer. So this layer is separate from the map layer. And once you have the map set up, you want to lock it so that way you don't accidentally move it. And on the effects layer, I'm going to go ahead and click on the water tool. And what you'll notice is it pretty much covers the entire map. And that's not what you want to do. So we're going to go ahead and click on the enable mask, which covers it again. And then we're only going to allow these certain sections of the river to bleed through the mask so that you can see the illusion of the moving water. So I'm in the effects tool, and I'm actually in a mask tool right now. So to draw the masks, you can usually do like a big square in this case, or a rectangle. So I'll get a majority of the mask removed from this part of the map. And then maybe the very edge where the straight line is. I'll grab some of that. And that will take care of a majority of the area where I want the river to show. And now I'm going to hold the Alt key and freehand the areas that are next to these bushes so that I can get a little bit more precise. And I'm just kind of going around the contour. It doesn't need to be perfect, but as you can see, it's kind of opening up these shoreline areas for a little bit more immersion for the reflection of the water and that sort of thing. And again, I'm going to do it down here next to the shoreline. And I'm not going right to the edge. I'm going close to the edge, but not right on the edge. And that's important because if you pull too close, it will pull in the actual land where you don't want it to actually show. And if you want to get these little smaller details, you can do that, but they're more than likely people won't see that. So that it's probably not worth it. You can even come through here and like there's a spot where they might be able to see through this bridge. So you can do that if you really feel compelled to. So you can kind of give that illusion of the reflection from the water below. So that might be something that you want to put in there. But all in all, it's just really, I mean, you're going to be zoomed out most of the time. You're not going to see half of that anyways. So now I'm going to do the same on this side. So I'm just going to grab and go around the edges, capture that stuff. I wish it wouldn't do that. For some reason, once in a while, when you're drawing these things, it will grab and pull a straight line. I didn't want that. So I want to go ahead and go back over this. I hit Control Z to undo what I just did because it goofed up on me for some reason. And now I'm just going to take and drag this around. So that gives me some of the shoreline. I'm going to do the same thing down here. Just going to grab shoreline, some of these areas along the edges of the trees. And that way you get that illusion of the water or the movement in the river. So then after you're done putting that in, let's go ahead and recenter the map. So you have a little drop-down toggle toolbar, in which case you have a zoom to fit button that makes it a little quicker to center instead of right-clicking and doing it that way. So now you can see there's a little bit of a movement in here, and I'm going to use the blur tool. And what that does is it puts a little bit of a fade on the very edge where the water line, where it quits. So that way it kind of blends in with the map a little more, and it's not so obvious that it's a layer. So that will blend that layer in underneath with the existing layer, so it doesn't look like there's a hard line there. And that's what you want, is kind of blend it into the map so it looks a little better. So there's the river. Now you can change the horizontal size. You can, the intensity, you can bring that up a little bit so it's just a little bit more active so that it stands out a little more. But if you do it too much, it's going to look like, like something crazy. So there's the river. So when people come up to it, they'll know it's a river. I think that intensity was too much. So I just went up by 1. So instead of 15, it's 16. You can change that depending on what you want to do, your setting. I turned the speed down a little bit. So now it actually looks like flowing water and not a big, moving jelly, basically. So that's important for that. Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks, Rob. And Tudo, or was that Tudo Polo XP, first time chat. Welcome. So now what I'm going to do is essentially just, get all the line of sight stuff done. And to test that, what I'm going to do now is go to play mode. And I'm going to take a look at what this looks like without any ambient light yet. So if I turn on enable disable lighting and go to line of sight and then enable this, the player vision, I'm not going to see anything because I don't have any light at all. And then here are the sides of the bridge. So what I want to do is turn off this line of sight for right now. And I'm going to go to lighting. And I want to go to the ambient light because right now its default is dark. There's no actual ambient light. So I want to go to sunshine or sunlight. And that's going to brighten things up a bit. And then I'm going to go back to the play tools and turn on line of sight. And what that'll do is it'll give you the impression of the actual shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and add an NPC to the map or a character. So I have one character that I've already created. So I'll just drag and drop her onto the combat tracker. And if you notice, I didn't put a grid on here. That's the first thing you want to do. So shame on me. So I went over, I'm going to go to grid, and I'm going to turn it on. And then you can see it's way too small. And I know that these maps are 140 by 140 or 72. So I'll go to 72. And that is too small as well. So I'll go to 140. Because the 140 is what they recommend for this. So this is essentially what you're getting when you do this map. And then I want to change the color because I don't want this horrendously looking, this kind of ugly thing. And what you'll notice here is that this is not centered all the way. So you might have to play around with it if you don't know the actual setting. So 72 was essentially the recommended DPI for the resolution, but 140 was the actual square. So let me try 144. Let's try that. 144. And this is where it's handy to know what you're actually getting as far as a map goes. So see, if you can see, it's not lined up in these corners. So that's a problem. Now, if I try to move this layer, I'm already messed up because I have my water and my other things on there. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. But 140 is the recommended size. And that's why you want to do this before you start making a map. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the... So I kind of essentially painted myself into a corner, but it's not the end of the world. It just doesn't look very good. And I'm going to take and put the color on here. So in this case, I'm going to use this yellow. That's my default that I use. And then I'm going to turn it down so it's not too bright. And then you have your grid on here. And then you also have your line of sight, your lighting on here. Now let's take the actual character and put him on the map. So I'm going to take Kalula here. She's a fairy rogue. Drag and drop her onto the map. So once you have control of her, Fantasy Grounds will start showing you what it's going to look like when you have possession. So here's the shadows coming off the trees. And as she moves across the map, there's the shadows for the tree trunks. So this just gives you an idea of what it might look like before you start playing. And it's a good idea to do this so that you have everything set up. So that's basically just adding a little bit of occluders, adding a few effects, turning on the sunlight, and then adding a character or NPC to the map. One of the takeaways was you want to go ahead and do this before you do anything as far as lining up the grid. So what I should have done is put the grid on it first, get everything lined up, and then do all the other work. Instead, I did it backwards, and this is the kind of thing you're going to get when that happens. So in a way, it was good to show you that. So this is something that you'll consider when you start building maps and start importing your own types of maps. Is this can be very time-consuming and annoying if you don't take the proper steps, and it takes a while to develop a flow or a type of way to do things. When you get a few free minutes after stream, can you send me a DM on Discord? Yeah, no problem, Shmo. So anyhow, this is going to be just a way to, I'm not going to go into a bunch of line of sight, but I do want to mention the map dimensions on here, and the fact that, you know, I didn't have this lined up properly, which sucked, as you can see. And then once you have this worked on, you go ahead and size the frame where you want it. So in this case, this is where I want it to be when I play. And I'm going to right click, go to view, and then zoom to fill, and then there we go. Now, one other thing you want to do is go into your tools for the options. And there is a thing under per user called turn auto center map. I have that off, but if you turn that on, what happens is the map will move on you. So if you don't want the map to move after you've recentered it, you want to turn that off. That only affects your table. It doesn't affect your players. So if they want to do it, they'll have to do it themselves. But that is a lifesaver. If you have a large map and you have it centered, you don't want it to move just so it can, you know, focus in and center in on the next player. Especially as a game master, you don't really need that. So you want to turn that off if that bothers you. So that's a handy tip. The other thing is to link maps together. So I have a regional map, and then I have this jungle map for the bridge. So I'm going to say that this exists somewhere along here. So we'll say right here is where this map is. So I'm going to link the map to this image, and that way when we get to that hex, we're crossing here, that's this map. And then just for convenience, I'm going to link this regional map over to this particular map. So that way, if I need to pull this up for reference, then I don't need to, you know, go back to my shortcuts. I can just go right there. And then if I want to bring up that other map from behind, I can do that. So this makes it so much easier than trying to, you know, even with shortcuts, that could be a. So again, if I want to recenter the map, I can right click on it, go to view, and then zoom to fit. So that helps with that. So basically that's what we're doing here. And it just kind of give you an idea of how to import maps, how to get them set up, how to link them together. Some things you want to consider when you're putting line of sight on is actually make sure you put the grid on first. As you saw, I kind of messed that up. And then you want to organize the files before you even import them. So when you have them imported into your campaign records under your images, you have your own group. And anything that I've edited is going to have this little letter P next to it. If I've shared it and edited it, it'll have like a little book, or it'll have a little edit thing. And then if I right click and go to sharing and I share this image record with the players, now this other little public button comes. And this is how you unshare images. So if you're done with this map and you never plan to cross the river again, then you can unshare it from here, from the images record area, and just click on that letter P, and that will unshare it with the table, which frees up memory resources. So even if you're not looking at the map or using it, if it's shared, it's still sharing that data back and forth. And that's what causes a lot of lag, is if you don't manage your campaign as you go, that could be an issue. So now this is where all the maps are. So once I get the maps and I use them, I put this little map, comma, whatever, and that helps me distinguish which maps I used, and it helps me organize it by the image type. because I might have NPC images, I might have handouts in here, and all kinds of things. So that's a nice way to organize within a group, is to put a prefix such as map, comma, or NPC, comma, or item, comma, whatever it is, so that it'll organize that in a hierarchy and it's easier to find stuff. So that's essentially all I got today. I'm going to call it a day. Thanks for watching. This will be on YouTube. I have the links for the maps that I was using here and some other pertinent links. And if you are new to Fantasy Grounds, come on over to the official Discord, or you can come over to the Fantasy Grounds Academy Discord, and we'll try to give you a hand with get your mind wrapped around using the platform. So take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.